pain is inevitable, suffering doesn't need to be, meaning that obviously throughout life there'll be various sources of pain, physical and mental, and kind of somewhere in between as well. But that most of this suffering that we experience is caused by our reaction to that pain rather than pain itself.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Lionheart Radio. We are currently in the beginning stages of summer, and it doesn't matter if you are a gym rat or a weekend warrior or an endurance athlete or some combination of all of them, kind of like myself. Everybody has one thing on their mind, and that is looking good naked. Everybody wants to look good and have some payoff for all of the hard work that they're doing behind the scenes. Everybody at Lionheart Radio is no different, from the host to the people that we have working behind the scenes. Now, if there is one thing that separates us apart, it's essentially the fact that we are not willing to sell you any bullshit. So what we've done is we've taken out the whole crash diet. We've saved you the 6 weeks to the next six-pack plan. And we've taken all of the knowledge that we have, collectively pooled it together, and put it in a document, a book, that you can download for free on lionheartrad.io. In that book, we have things that are going to help you get sustainably lean. We've got which workouts will help you burn more fat. We have tips on how to keep track of your daily calories and nutrition. And we've even got a glossary in the back with a list of movements and how you can plug them into your programming when you are looking for a desired result. Now, just like the show, everything is free. Go to lionheartrad.io and download your free ebook. As always, thank you for taking this journey with us. We will see you in the gym or at the beach. All right, well, welcome back to Lionheart Radio. I'm your host, Rick Alexander, founder of Blue Aviv in San Diego, California. And today I am joined by Fabio Zuchhelli. He is a research associate at the Center for Appearance Research in Bristol. His research includes mindfulness and self-compassion, and how these concepts can be intertwined in competitive sports, athletic training, and living healthy. His research is also geared towards body image and how this ties into healthy living. So, Fabio, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Rick. Lovely to speak with you.
Well, what did you think about that intro? Did that accurately sum up your research?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No,
okay.
I think so.
So I've read a few of your articles that you put out, and one of our team members actually turned me on to you in the first place. She said she's been trying to practice mindfulness a lot in her life. So could you give us a brief overview on kind of your research and then also like your findings?
Sure. So it's worth mentioning that I'm really interested in mindfulness and self-compassion and how they relate to exercise and to sport and kind of athletes more generally. But yeah, in the last few years, I've kind of pivoted into appearance research. So that's about body image, about how we perceive ourselves physically, and how that can influence the way we think generally and the way we behave. So so more recently, I've been looking at mindfulness and self-compassion and how they can be helpful for people who have problems with their body image, and specifically people who have what we call a visible difference. So that's kind of typically known as a disfiguring condition, and how mindfulness and acceptance of oneself, and more importantly, acceptance of experience and the thoughts we have, the feelings we have, the beliefs we have about ourselves, can help people who have a disfiguring condition and have to contend with lots of difficulties day to day in the social interactions, the way that people often stigmatize and don't even realize they're doing it, but they're interacting with people, feeling kind of, they may actually not intend to show it, but they may stare at people with disfiguring conditions and kind of say things and often ask questions about them that's unsolicited. And so, my research more recently has looked at how mindfulness and specifically something called acceptance and commitment therapy can help people who experience problems relating to having a disfiguring condition to live the life they want. Sure. But in relation to kind of healthy living more generally and sport and exercise, I did some research a few years ago looking at the relationship between self-compassion, people's self-reported levels of self-compassion, and the extent to which they exercise so engaging in physical activity of any kind, really, to the kind of in relation to how much they said they would do. So I did a longitudinal study to ask people, how much exercise do you intend to do over the following 4 weeks? And then 4 weeks later, ask them how much they've done over those 4 weeks, just to get a sense of whether self-compassion as a construct relates to people's ability to set realistic goals in terms of exercising, and whether that actually has a positive effect on kind of healthy living lifestyle as well. And I think I suppose the key thing about that was that I was interested in people who describe themselves as kind of casual exercisers, people who knew that they should do a bit more exercise really, but struggle from time to time, which describes actually the vast majority of people really.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and particularly in westernized countries where everyone knows they should be doing it, but for so many different lifestyle reasons and constraints, people aren't doing it. And so I found that people who were more self-compassionate, describe themselves as being more self-compassionate, did tend to set more realistic exercise goals. And the implications of that are that people who set unrealistic exercise goals tend to struggle in the long term to keep up with exercise, because it's difficult if you're constantly not meeting your targets kind of intrinsically to keep up the motivation in the long run. Yeah, sure. So that's kind of my personal research, but I've also embedded within a research center, as you say, where we've been looking more generally at mindfulness and body image.
So I think that what we have here is an active lifestyle podcast. So we have people that, are runners, powerlifters, bodybuilders. And I think having a body dysmorphia is kind of what I've heard it referred to before.
Yeah.
So having that body dysmorphia, I think, is something that almost everybody that lives within these active lifestyle has some relationship with at some point in their life. So whether that's they want to be bigger or they want to be skinnier or whatever that is. And sometimes it's stemmed from sport, and then sometimes it's stemmed from just their lifestyle experiences. Sure. I'm curious, what turned you on to this in the first place?
Yeah, so I suppose I've always been quite active. I've always played sport. But yeah, I think that the reason I got really interested in the way that we perceive our bodies relates to how we use our bodies kind of came from going to the gym quite regularly when I was at university, so sort of 18 onwards. I think I noticed that I never really thought about my body shape. I thought about appearance a lot. I was a teenager, right? So everyone does, it's an important element of life at that age.
Sure.
But never really thought about my body shape, how I looked as being important. And I originally went to the gym because my friends were going, and then I would just do some strength training, general stuff, sort of dumbbells, nothing too extreme. And I think I very quickly observed that it was becoming more and more important to me how I looked physically. So I was kind of evaluating my arms, my shoulders, my lats. Everything was it became like an aesthetic sport. And actually, I'd gone into it intending to get fit so that I could play soccer, tennis, and run with more success. And it became a whole other kind of beast. So as you say, I can imagine that pretty much everyone who is in the world of active lifestyle is working out for whatever reason, whether it's strength and conditioning for a particular event, or if people just enjoy keeping active, going to the gym. As you say, they will come into contact with some evaluation of body and the environment itself. So the Centre for Appearance Research as well, also interested in the environment, the social reasons as to why the people's bodies are so kind of emphasized. And you think about, I'm sure it's the same in the US, that gyms are filled with mirrors. Appreciate that a lot of people doing serious weightlifting need to keep an eye on their form, so that's important too. But in all kinds of gyms, in front of treadmills, and in all kind of rowing machines and everything, there's a real pressure and awareness of your own body, and you're around people, ultra fit characters, and you start comparing yourself because we're social beings and we kind of live in hierarchical structures, just in evolutionary terms. So we start comparing ourselves with others, and it can become quite addictive, and we can become completely unknown to ourselves, addicted to that sense of comparison. And particularly when you're looking at something like bodybuilding, that is inherently an aesthetic sport. It's about
right.
designing or sculpting, your body in a certain way.
Right.
It can very quickly take things over to the point of, as you said, in the case of bodybuilding, muscle dysphoria, where you're so preoccupied with looking as muscular as possible, and also you're considering that you're in no way meeting those standards.
Yeah.
So I came from it just from a personal experience, really, of hitting the gym for the first time, and noticing just how much I started caring about the way my body looks, having never done so before.
Yeah, it's interesting. I at least in my own experience, it seems like some kind of body dysmorphia it's almost like a snowball effect where you start out wanting to look a little bit better or perform a little bit better, and then you keep getting bigger, and the people around, or for me, it was like when I was growing up, I always wanted to be bigger, right? I always wanted to be stronger. And I think a lot of guys can relate to that. And then from the outside, people look at you and they're like, you're strong, like you are muscular. They would describe you that way. But for you, it's like you never get there. It's not attainable. I don't know if you found that exact same thing, but.
Yeah, I suppose that's it, because like in so many areas of life, whatever level you're currently at, you're aspiring for the next echelon, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because, you're a competitor. It's kind of inbuilt that you aspire to reach that next goal, which in this case, in the case of, say, bodybuilding, is very directly your size, the size of the various muscles across your body.
Right. But now, in order to be successful in life, however, there does need to be some kind of a balance, right? Because if you are too content, right, it would seem from the outside, and maybe this is too macro of a view, but it would seem if you're too content that it's really hard you wouldn't be the kind of person that's pushing for that next level. So how do we find that balance then between being satisfied and compassionate towards ourselves versus wanting that next level?
I think that's a really great question, because that cuts right to the heart, really, of the overall mindfulness project, I suppose. And a common observation about mindfulness and how something inherent within mindfulness as being non-striving, how does that fit with the way that, particularly in most of westernized culture, we do feel the need to strive in order to achieve, because we live in a culture where we are focused on outcome. So I think it's a really good question, and I suppose that my take on it and the take of kind of mindfulness and the whole philosophy around mindfulness and compassion is that actually often we'll observe positive outcomes of whatever you're doing, whether it's in your work, your personal work, or whether it's in sports competitions, ultra eventing, whatever it is. You will notice positive outcomes as a byproduct of focusing on process. And we know this generally more and more in sports psychology as well, to focus on the micro process of what you're doing, to break things down into technique and moment by moment practice.
Sure.
Will have knock-on effects on your outcome. And you can also hold goals consistent with a kind of more process-driven approach. So you can still hold goals that are framed by values. So without going into too much detail, this particular type of approach that holds mindfulness as part of its core is called acceptance and commitment therapy, or training when it's less kind of clinically focused. Actually asks people to identify their own life values. So it may be something like, I want to spend time with my family, I want to be family orientated, or I want to achieve success in sport, I want to be the most kind of physically fit person I can be, I want to be healthy. So those kind of values can inform goals. And the good thing about those values is that that they're not a goal as such. They're just an orientation, like a direction on a compass. And so I think that it is possible to pay attention to yourself and be kind to yourself while still striving towards goals that are inherently valuable to yourself. And it brings up, it's a good question as well, because it brings up a common misconception about self-compassion as being something that maybe encourages self-indulgence or not really caring whether you're meeting your training goals, for example, because, well, you know what, I'm just going to be kind to myself no matter what happens, right?
Right.
Whereas actually a true self-compassion is understanding what is really good for yourself, what's really valuable to yourself. So being kind to yourself might involve short-term pain for long-term gain. It might involve kind of doing those last 2 reps that are incredibly painful because you know that actually that's what you really want, and being kind to yourself includes something that could be painful for them in the moment.
So essentially, like, I guess if I could kind of boil it down, and you could tell me if I'm kind of on the mark or if I'm missing it, but you're kind of saying that self-compassion, if you have self-compassion, if you're able to foster that within yourself, you'll be able to kind of go the extra mile, do the extra rep, put out and push a little bit harder, because at the end, you're going to value the person that pain will make you.
Sure. Yeah. And I suppose it helps to have an already predefined set of values and a sense of direction in the first place, so that you know where you're going, so that you're able to direct your compassion. Yeah, because otherwise I think if you don't have a sense of clarity of what you want to achieve in the long run, then it's easy to convince yourself that you are eating a pizza when actually, you know, it's not what you should be doing at 1 o'clock in the morning, whatever.
Right.
I'm doing this out of self-compassion. Whereas if you have an idea of what you want to do, so, you know, I know that I want to cut down on how much I'm eating, how many carbs I'm eating, for example, and then you know that in that instant being self-compassionate involves not eating the pizza.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and that's interesting, and I like the way that you highlight that, because that's something that I've almost had a problem with. Is I think as a culture we've almost swung back so far that it's like, no, we should just. I don't want to sound crash by being like, oh, we should just accept everyone, but that's essentially the thing, right? Like the dad bod got really big for a while.
Sure.
Right, and so part of it's like, I feel like we are encouraging bad behavior at some point.
Sure, I see what you mean. Yeah.
And so highlighting that is important. So growing up in the fitness industry, I've kind of seen a dichotomy between people that are working out for performance, which I think has grown a lot in the past like decade, versus people that are working out for aesthetics, or, you know, like we always say, to look good naked, right? That's what everybody is. But people like to kind of fall, I think, probably somewhere in the middle. Like even people that work out for performance definitely do care how they look. I'm wondering if you've seen a relationship between focusing on maybe what your body's capable of and not going down that wrong road of self-indulgence.
Sure.
So if you're too focused on aesthetics, do you think that does that change the way that people feel about themselves? Do you have more self-compassion if you're more focused on capability? Might be a better way to put it.
I think that's a really good question. And I think the answer from early stages of research that actually a colleague of mine, Jessica Oliver, has been looking at, suggests, yes, that is the case. And she's done a lot of work on body function, body aesthetics, and as you say, kind of that being the focus of people's exercise, and the way that can impact on your body appreciation, how you feel about your body overall, your satisfaction with your body. Because you're focusing on what can my body do, rather than what does it look like. And what does my body look like it's a very fragile focus, because it's reliant on other people's evaluation. Even though you may be thinking a lot of the time, it's only in reference to myself, really. Mm-hmm. But if no one else was around, then you wouldn't be thinking that way. If you were the last person on Earth,
right.
You'd probably be worrying about other stuff. But
probably capability at that point, right? Survival capability.
Yes, yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. But yes, so I think the idea of focusing on what you're capable of, as distinct from what you're not capable of course, certainly, as far as I'm aware, is going to only improve the way that you feel about your body. And actually, another point around that is that generally body image and the way that we're worrying about our bodies and how other people are perceiving our bodies, is very much an external, extrinsic motivation, because it relies on others' evaluation. So the rewards are external. Again, we may think that it's internal because, oh, I look great today, but that's still in reference to something that is actually external. You're not getting any kind of inherent self-worth from something that's kind of you're nurturing long term. Whereas intrinsic motivation, so that's enjoyment, a sense of alignment to your own values, whether that's health and well-being or otherwise, that has much more long-term adaptive consequences. So again, that comes back to function. So if you're trying to work on your deadlift,
mm-hmm.
also the more you're thinking about aesthetics at the time, the more you're distracting from the function.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too if it has anything to do with getting tangible feedback.
Sure.
For example, if you're trying to increase your deadlift, like that is a number that you can measure, and it feels good when you get that positive feedback of actually accomplishing, hey, I added 5 pounds
Sure.
or kilos or whatever it is to your lift. Whereas when you're looking in the mirror, you never get that tangible feedback, so it's easy to maybe want to pursue more.
Yes, with you. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
So if you have somebody that you care about in your life, maybe a client, maybe it's yourself, maybe a friend, would it be an appropriate, if somebody's struggling with this kind of body disfigurement type attitude, would it be appropriate to maybe try to push them to focus more on performance, do you think, based on what you guys have found so far?
Yes, and I think both performance and actually cultivating a more kind of a wide sense of self, because it depends kind of what the aim is of this particular intervention, as it were. If it was
Sure.
a friend or someone that I was caring about and I'm thinking I'd like them to be happy and healthy,
right?
Or if I just wanted them to to succeed and get the results that they're looking for.
Let's go with happy and healthy.
Okay, great. Yeah, could be. I'm glad we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Then, I suppose it would be a question of helping them to strip back their motivations for what they're doing and really ultimately trying to help them align the way they're exercising, the way they're training, to what they really want to get from life, rather than focusing on something that may be quite external, like the way they look.
Yeah.
And I happen to think that mindfulness and its inherent self-compassion is a really good way of cultivating that mindset.
So we've talked about mindfulness quite a bit so far. Now, I'd like to kind of get into what that is so that people can maybe
Sure.
Understand it a little better. So as, sentient beings, aren't we all mindful? Or is mindfulness maybe a higher state of being where you're able to kind of detach emotionally from the things around you?
That's a very interesting way of putting it. I've never heard it that way before. Certainly as sentient beings, we all have the capacity to be mindful, 100%. And so I suppose the issue comes when you have highly developed prefrontal cortex like humans do, and thinking gets in the way.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where the issue comes up. So mindfulness being, I suppose it might be helpful just to define it for those who perhaps kind of haven't got a clear idea of what it is. So it comes down to one's capacity to hold attention. So both sustaining attention, intended, directed attention on something or more than one thing at a time, and also being able to shift between different focuses of attention, intentionally. And then the thing that separates mindfulness from pure attention training is the quality that you bring in that moment to the focus of attention. And so that includes being kind to or friendly to whatever it is you're experiencing, not judging it, and being compassionate towards it. And also it kind of whatever you're focusing on will be in the present moment. And so all of those things we all absolutely have the capacity to do, but I think that so many of us are so far removed from that experience, and I think as soon as we start trying to practice mindfulness, we start realizing just how mindless we are. And I'm exactly the same. I started off from very much a position of being incredibly mindless, not moment to moment throughout my day, not being mindful at all.
Yeah.
So that's being driven by your thoughts, seeing your thoughts as facts, essentially just kind of following whatever stream of consciousness it is without actually separating stimulus to response. So mindfulness helps to kind of really open up that gap and give you more control and more of a choice to make. So a conscious choice. This has just happened. I'm experiencing this physical pain or whatever it is in this moment. How do I want to respond to this without getting sucked up into the kind of associative thinking? So for example, you're going for a run and you feel a pain in your foot. Not being mindful most likely involve thinking, oh no, I know this pain. This comes from an old injury. Oh God, here we go. This is going to set me back weeks. Oh, this injury is going to...
Just reacting to it. Getting
exactly.
Just being emotion.
Exactly. And I think the vast majority of people, including myself, are prone to being a slave to our thoughts and reacting to those. So mindfulness would involve feeling the sensations and then observing the thoughts that come with it, but just seeing them as thoughts. Oh, there's a thought. I'm having this evaluative thought, and kind of allowing them to pass by themselves. And very, very often, that's going to result in kind of better physical and mental long-term effects.
Sure. You mentioned something which was the quality of our thoughts and our attention, I believe you said. I'm interested in, what do you believe the role that technology plays in our quality of our attention, or maybe lack thereof?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question again, because I think it's had quite a disruptive role.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you'd agree, even within the last sort of 15 years, I'm sure you've noticed as well. So I used to enjoy reading literature, books, actual whole books. And over the last couple of years, I've just noticed I'm reading fewer and fewer books. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that we consume, inverted commas, media now. And I think we just seek out information. So we want to extract information from a source as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. And we don't want to waste any time on storytelling or context or whatever rich background it is that you might get in, say, a novel.
Yeah.
That is just a small example, really. But yeah, and I think that's come about from our addiction to this kind of bionic mobile phone. Cell phone that is, I think, is part of us now, isn't it? And and I think that comes with that is the moment to moment multitasking, switching between apps, switching between messages, videos, all very short, and we're very quick to skip from one Spotify track to another.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you've bought a CD for $15, then you want to invest the time. You want to read through the CD case. Oh, this is great. You want to absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about that, reading through a CD inlay, that's quite mindful. You're listening to a song. You're reading about it. You're taking it all in. You're immersed in the experience. Whereas now you're going to Spotify or other available streaming services, and you're thinking, oh, related artists, I'll listen to this one. No, after 30 seconds, no, this doesn't sound quite right. So yeah, just that sense of shifting from one thing to the next really quickly, and damage that can have on our attentional resources as well. So I think a lot of us will come from a very depleted starting point if we try and start cultivating an attentional capacity.
I think there's I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, but equally it means that now is more important than ever before for us to develop that capacity to be able to, for example, shift between different tasks quickly.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, because I think there's a transition that happens where maybe it starts on your phone, where, at least this is what I notice, I can't even if I'm driving or talking to somebody else, I'll instinctively pull out my phone and start scrolling through Instagram or something really stupid like that. That really just takes you away from the present situation you're in.
Sure.
But then the transition that happens is when you get to, specifically for our listeners, when you start training, when you go to the gym, you have trouble, like at least for me, I never used to have trouble like getting through workouts. But I literally would get to the point where I was like ready to do something else, or I'd be on my phone in the gym, or all these things that really ruin the context of why you're there, which is going to diminish your training.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because so that's something that you love doing and you've never before really had any problems immersing yourself in and getting into the zone. And now there's just these hundreds of distractions that live on your phone.
Yeah, right.
And are kind of immediately accessible. On the same device that you maybe want to listen to music or whatever it is that you might aid your routine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
If people are finding that they also have trouble with mindfulness and being present, which I think almost everybody listening in 2017 probably can relate to on some level.
Sure.
What are ways that you recommend being able to cultivate or foster that within yourself?
Well, I suppose there are really simple little life hacks that people might be able to think about when they're actually working out, for example. One, I think, sage piece of wisdom that I've heard that, again, comes from mindfulness, is just do one thing at a time. And so that comes back to what you were saying there. You know, when you're doing a workout, you're getting distracted, you're on your phone, you're doing different things. So the more attentional resources we can apply to something, whatever it is that you're intending to do at the time, the stronger the output will be. So if you're working out and you've got your phone, say even you want to listen to music, maybe turn off and you've got that music available on your phone downloaded, maybe turn off your signal so that you're not able, messages aren't streaming through.
Put on airplane mode.
Sure, yeah, airplane mode is another way to do it. So yeah, exactly. So just kind of narrowing the capacity for distractions.
Sure.
So that's a very sort of practical way of doing it. And then there are more long-term projects or project type ways of approaching that cultivation. So mindfulness, typically people are taught mindfulness through formal meditation practice. So, you know, I'm sure a lot of listeners are fully kind of aware of what that involves, but just to go through it quickly anyway, might involve taking a specific posture that's quite upright but kind of still, and bringing attention intentionally to, might be your breath, and just following it in and out without actually consciously changing the pattern of your breath, and just becoming more and more aware of the sensations coming in and out, and then also holding that non-judgmental orientation, that quality of attention throughout, and just noticing whenever your mind wanders off, and then bringing your mind back to whatever you're focusing on. So say it's your breath, and your mind will wander off a million times.
Yeah.
But each time it wanders off and you come back to it, that's like a mental bicep curl. That's where the attentional capacity is being cultivated. And self-compassion comes into it there, because people often get very annoyed at themselves for constantly wandering off. Because as I said, you become suddenly aware of just how crazy you are, how crazy we all are,
right.
How little control we have over our minds, how they're constantly just jumping from, like a monkey, just jumping from one tree to another. And so that's kind of part of the training, is being kind enough to yourself and your experience to bring yourself back to what you're focusing on, without just spending the whole time hammering on yourself about, my mind's always wandering off. I'm no good at this. And that's a very common experience that people describe when starting mindfulness. But the idea is really just to savor the intention that you're holding, and being confident and holding some faith in the fact that maintaining that intention to sit down for, even if it's 10 minutes a morning, say, and there are plenty of apps that are available to guide these meditations, and just stick with it and see it as a process that, like training in any kind of events, is going to be tricky. It's going to have its ups and downs.
Yeah.
But that it's, I suppose, is when you start to see some benefits, that it naturally starts kind of building momentum.
Yeah.
And I think people who stick at it for, I suppose, few weeks at a time, most of the interventions that have been developed are kind of 8 weeks or so. Once you start sticking at it, once you stick at it for a few weeks, then most people do start to notice benefits in terms of just having a bit more control in the decisions they make, and the implications of that. So the implications of widening the gap between stimulus and response are huge, because that's such a fundamental area of the perceptual process. So really the implications go from mental well-being, from productivity, for example, in the workplace or during hobbies, to physical outcomes like improved immune response and recovery time, because you're also activating the parasympathetic nervous system, so the autonomic the part of the autonomic nervous system that helps us sort of rest and digest. So that's the kind of longer term view on how literally anyone can try and cultivate a more mindful moment to moment experience. And really, there has to be a certain degree of belief that will actually help you to, say, perform, feel happier and healthier in the process. And that only really happens when you experience it for yourself. All people like me can do is to kind of explain and give people the confidence that will happen.
Yeah, and I'm just speculating, but you brought up the autonomous nervous system and the parasympathetic rest, the things that take place when you're resting, and I'd imagine that it has to improve recovery quite a bit as well.
Sure.
Because that's one of the markers you look for in recovery.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So I think someone called Richard Davidson from University of Wisconsin has been the main researcher, his lab. They've been the main guys looking at that. And so they've done fMRI studies and EEG studies, and they found some really cool stuff quite consistently. It was actually the Dalai Lama who contacted them and kind of initiated the contact and said, look, we want to show some neuroscience here as to back up the effect of mindfulness. What can you do for us? And, So that's what they've done, and they found quite consistently that experienced meditators have much improved, stronger parasympathetic nervous activation over sympathetic nervous activation. So that's more around the kind of fight or flight or anxious type response. And I think they also found longer oscillations of gamma waves in the brain that again helps or is related to reduced blood pressure and reduced inflammation as well. So I think through various inflammation biomarkers and aging process, experienced meditators, and the more that you practice mindfulness, the stronger your immune system will be, and yes, the more you'll kind of be primed to rest, and your body will kind of look after itself in the way that it's meant to, without all of the noise that we normally live with day to day. Yeah.
It's interesting that in the East, they kind of know these things intrinsically. It seems like they've been, receiving the benefits of mindfulness for a long time. And in the West, we're like, we got to prove it with neuroscience, and I need to see data and numbers. And,
sure.
And it's just to kind of step back off the hamster wheel for a minute.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Are you familiar with the float tank?
The float tank?
Yeah.
Yes, so it was in kind of sensory deprivation.
Yep, exactly.
Yes, yeah, I've had a go once myself, and because I know Joe Rogan always talks about it when I listen to his podcast.
Right. That's right, he does.
Sure. Do you do it yourself?
I do. So after every single event, I make sure to schedule it before I even go do the hard training event.
Okay.
And I was gonna say at first, the idea of trying to be more mindful, it almost forces that upon you.
Right.
For the first 20 minutes, you're like fighting it, and you're like, I got to get out of this thing. But if you make yourself stay there for an hour, eventually it just almost forces that, like, all right, I'm here, so I got to deal with it.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, sorry, you carry on.
I was just going to say it's interesting because once I first noticed that almost a lack of mindfulness in my everyday life, my first reaction was like, oh, I hate this. I want it out. I want technology gone. I'm going to go live in a temple. I'm done with this because it's diminishing my quality of life. But you realize that if you want to affect the masses, if you want to affect people, that's not going to be an option. People, the smartphone's here and it's only going to get crazier. And they're even coding addictive traits into things like gaming and into the smartphone. So it's only going to get crazier. So I think one of the ways to counteract that is to leverage technology. So there's apps like the Headspace app. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, which is a great meditation app. And I think that's probably the way that people should consider going if they're interested in being more mindful and kind of improving quality of life that way.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think whatever fits into your life, that's the way you need to go. Heading off to Southeast Asia for a 3-month retreat is unlikely to fit in most people's lives, isn't it?
Right.
And I think a lot of those apps are really good at being realistic in the way that they introduce mindfulness into people's lives. So yeah, it might start with 2 minutes in the morning and slowly build up to 10 minutes. And I think, it might seem absolutely minuscule, but I think people observe incremental effects. I think there's a dose response relationship, so that the more you're able to do it, the more benefits you'll get.
Yeah.
But as I said earlier, kind of people need to see the benefits for themselves, really. But yeah, something like Headspace, or even just taking 3 minutes out, if you're at work, just kind of going to the restroom, just sitting down and avoiding the habitual response to take your phone out, perhaps, and just sitting for 3 minutes and just sort of checking in with yourself really, and just slowing down, grounding your body, feeling sensations throughout your body. I think it could, even that little amount can just help to reset people. That's a term that people often use, kind of resetting, grounding, feeling earthed, almost like a current, feeling earthed, and just being able to step back, slow down a little bit. I think there's something that's hardwired into a lot of us from an early age, with this really fast-paced world we live in, is that you need to do everything quick, sharp. And so the idea of, in order to be efficient, you need to do everything quickly. I think that gets drilled in fairly early on, and particularly through the kind of disposable kind of media that we now get used to. So, social media, everything's just so quick, that actually I think it's very easy to get sucked into the belief that I don't have time to commit to mindfulness. It's going to take up half an hour of my day. There's no way that I can do that because I've got so much other stuff to fit in. I've got my work, I've got my family, I've got my hobbies. There's no way. But I think the more that people start introducing into their daily life, so maybe 2 minutes to start off with, 3 minutes the next week, 5 minutes the following week, 10 minutes, etc., the more you start noticing that actually that time is subtracting time from the rest of your day, because you're likely to become more efficient in the way that you respond to things. The analogy that I quite like is coming across a guy in the woods who's soaring away at a tree, kind of sweating, red, looking really angered, just soaring away. They're making no progress at all, and you kind of walk up closer to them, and you notice that the saw they're using is completely blunt. They're just hacking away, getting angrier and angrier, getting really stressed. And you stop them and say, do you maybe want to? I notice you're sawing away there, and it's not making much difference. Do you want to maybe sharpen your saw? I notice it's very blunt, and they just say, no time. I've got to do all these trees. And so mindfulness is obviously it's sharpening the saw in that instance. It's taking time that you may not necessarily think you have, carving it out of your day to actually sharpen the saw so that you're more able to, for example, function at work and produce more and get more maybe out of your your gym sessions, your training, because maybe actually during your training your mind is wandering off and you're spending 15 minutes of an hour-long workout doing stuff that has nothing to do with your workout, maybe. So it's kind of...
That's a good analogy. That's really good.
Yeah, I like it a lot too.
Yeah. That gives an idea. It makes it able for people to picture,
Yeah.
an abstract thing almost.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I started doing Headspace. I actually did it for a couple months, and I didn't really know if I noticed a difference or not. And those days where sometimes you wake up and you're just in a bad mood and you don't know why.
Very well, yeah.
Right. I found myself like that, and I'm kind of, I'm kind of like bitching about things, and I'm in a conversation with somebody, and it was like almost out of nowhere. I felt like I could step back and just detract from that situation, and I literally just analyzed it. Like, why do you feel like this? It was a weird thing, but it was just such a noticeable thing that I've never felt before, that it was like,
Sure.
I'm onto something here.
Right. Okay. So it was like a eureka moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
And it's kind of, it's made me, and I'm curious if your research has made you this way as well, but it's made me very interested in kind of a lot of Buddha's philosophies and things like that. And I've really been spending a lot of time looking into that. And I don't know if you've felt the same way or.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in Western culture, we're driven by capitalism. We're driven by consumer culture, for better or worse. And I think, for a lot of times it's better, but when it comes to mindfulness, it's definitely worse. I'm wondering, has there been a good mainstream acceptance of your research and what you're trying to do?
Yes, I think mindfulness right now is a real hot topic. It's very popular. Mm-hmm. Both, I think, in mainstream society, people are more and more aware of mindfulness as a term. I mean, I think even 5 years ago, most of my friends and colleagues didn't even know what it was, really.
Yeah.
People had probably heard of it, but they didn't really know what it was. Whereas now, I think it's very rare to meet someone kind of, I don't know, in the 20s upwards who doesn't have some sense of what it is. And yeah, so our research that's focusing on the way that cultivating mindfulness can help people's body image and their behavior, and how the kind of healthy behavior that may contribute towards, for example, in preventing eating disorders. So that's an area of research that the Centre for Appearance Research is focused on, my colleague Mel Atkinson. So yeah, actually there has been a real interest in that research, because a lot of funders are very interested in mindfulness, because it does seem to have such wide-ranging effects. So often it gets called trans-therapeutic, meaning that someone with depression or recurring depression may attend an 8-week mindfulness-based cognitive therapy course, and they'll feel some benefits in terms of their mood. They might notice that they're ruminating less, and generally they're more able to notice when they're kind of being sucked into unhelpful patterns. And then they might notice that they're getting fewer colds as well. Yeah. And so there's something about mindfulness that's, and I'm sure you may have experienced yourself, it's quite holistically helpful. And I think there's the one line of skepticism that kind of occurs within maybe the research community who aren't directly involved in it, and just healthy skeptical public as well, is this idea of mindfulness being a cure-all. Something's not quite right here. It's a bit like in the UK, you have lots of Chinese herbal remedy stores, and they kind of proclaim to, help depression, anxiety, it could be anything, asthma, epilepsy, and you're just thinking, hang on a minute.
Right.
That kind of raises alarm bells, right?
Yeah, the snake oil salesman.
Sure, exactly, yeah. And so the same criticism is probably very understandably placed at mindfulness, but as I said, I think the important distinction is that you're intervening at the stage of stimulus and response, and in that it's an incredibly powerful change that you're making by reacting less. You may end up tensing less, and as I said, because you're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, your response is kind of framed with the undercurrent of just being more at ease. Mm-hmm. And the knock-on effects that will have both mentally and physically. You mentioned recovery, and then mentally noticing when you're getting trapped in unhelpful patterns, whatever that may in your life have caused in the negative sense before. So that's the main criticism that people hold, but I think that it's very understandable, but it's not perhaps it's not held by those with a really deep understanding of what mindfulness is.
Yeah, sure. I think that it must help as well, that the idea that the physical and your mental states are so intertwined. And I think that idea is becoming much more known in the mainstream.
Yes, absolutely. And you look at something like yoga that's been around for decades. I think there's been yogis or yoga practitioners have maybe been the first to see this in the US and in Europe and countries who aren't typically steeped in kind of Eastern traditions.
Mm-hmm.
I think people who've practiced yoga and say Tai Chi, Qigong, kind of that do cross that mind-body barrier or apparent barrier. I think that those people have kind of got in touch with their bodies and observed the intelligence of their bodies and how much impact the way that you respond to your body has on the way that you think, and vice versa, and the way that you feel.
Yeah,
it's incredible. And actually yoga is something that I don't do myself, although very occasionally, and I keep meaning to do it.
Yeah. I keep meaning to be mindful.
Yeah, I must get around to it.
Yeah.
One day.
I'm not so busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's apparent, the way I tell people to think about the physical, the way that mental states manifest themselves physically. It's like if you're so worried about something, you're actually worried sick, right? Where your stomach is in knots. It's like that's the best way to realize oh no. Yeah.
Well, today I occasionally get some irritable bowel syndrome. So I just get some real tensing in my stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just before this podcast, I kind of felt it a little bit.
Yeah.
Nervousness. So before I was introduced to mindfulness and started practicing, I think I would have responded very differently. I.e., I would have thought, oh God, this is a problem. I've got these symptoms. They're only going to get worse. Oh God, and I've got this podcast to do. What bad timing. And then really focusing on worrying about what it could mean. Am I going to need to rush to the toilet whilst I'm doing the podcast?
Right.
So now, having developed more of a mindfulness practice and I hope a more moment-to-moment kind of mindful orientation, I saw it as a signal. I'm feeling nervous. These sensations occur when I feel nervous, and that's okay. I'm feeling nervous, but the less I freak out about the physical sensations, the more likely it is I'm going to be able to just, they'll subside by themselves.
It worked. We made it through.
And just need the toilet.
Yeah, no bathroom breaks. Cool, man. Well, the Lionheart Kicker is a final question that we ask everybody, and that is, based on the research that you've done, based on maybe your life experience and the things that you've done up until this point, if you could give blanket advice and it were guaranteed that everybody in the world would hear it and it'd be translated to every language, and maybe they wouldn't follow it, but they would definitely hear your advice, what would you tell people?
Is be mindful a bit too short? I imagine it probably is. Well, I think there's a particular phrase that I absolutely love and completely adhere to, and that's pain is inevitable, suffering doesn't need to be. Meaning that obviously throughout life there'll be various sources of pain, physical and mental, and kind of somewhere in between as well. But that most of this suffering that we experience is caused by our reaction to that pain rather than pain itself. So, for example, when I talked about noticing a pain when you're running, the suffering that may arise from that would come from your response to that pain, that stimulus, worrying about it, churning over it over and over again. And so really the way to reduce suffering, because I think we're not all going to become Buddhas within our life. It's very unlikely we'll be able to do that.
Right.
Because as you said, the best way to make a difference to our own lives and to others is to live within our actual world that we live in. So going off to India for the rest of your life and leaving your family is probably not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But so the best way to reduce that suffering is essentially to practice mindfulness, and that can be done both formally, so through meditation practice, and informally, so that's just could be in a particular moment before you send an email and you're feeling angry and the email is going to look pretty angry.
Yeah.
It's maybe taking 10 seconds, breathing, thinking, okay, what do I consciously want to do right now? Or what does the real me want to do? What do my values say that I want to do? So yeah, both formally and informally, and doing it realistically. So I think something like an app is a really good way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Just something that doesn't take out any sizable chunk of your day. I think generally a lot of people find that starting to practice mindfulness is best done in the mornings, although not for everyone, so it's not like a blanket thing. But generally, I think people find if they can integrate it into their morning routine, there's more routine in the morning, isn't there, than
sure.
the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And it's easy to forget to do stuff throughout the day because so much other stuff comes up. So before all of the chaos ascends on the day, fit it in so that you've done it. It's kind of like making your bed, I suppose.
Yeah.
Do it in the morning and you know it's done. Or seeing it as part of your rest is another helpful way to look at it. That's certainly what I do.
Just
adding on.
Setting the tone for the day. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. And just, you sleep for 7 hours or whatever. And part of that rest and kind of replenishing your body and mind is 10 minutes of sitting down, watching your breathing.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I can't remember what movie it was, but there's a guy and he's staying at this house and he says he doesn't make his bed in the morning, and the girl comes up to him and she's like, "Dad says that you got to make your bed in the morning because it sets the tone for the day." And he's like,
"Okay,
well, how do you know what kind of tone I'm trying to set?"
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Maybe rebellious people will just kind of throw the sheets around a bit more.
Right. But I love the delineation that you made between pain and suffering, because I found them to not be related, and if you can separate them in sport specifically, it's going to make you better. So I'm big into running ultra marathons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And around mile 30, inevitably it starts hurting. Like the legs, just the metronome of your feet pounding the ground just start fucking hurting. And
sure.
I always ask myself that question, is I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Is it just pain? Because if it's just pain, you're fine.
Yeah.
Like if it's just pain, you're good.
Yeah.
And I've never really been able to put words to why I even ask myself that. So I like that delineation that you made. That's interesting.
Sure. Well, if you've got to mile 35, then you clearly conquered the distinction between the two.
Yeah, sometimes. So for people that are listening to this and they're interested in your work and want to follow along with your journey and get maybe a little more in depth in what you do, how can they do that?
Sure. So probably the simplest way is just to Google Centre for Appearance Research. Centre spelled the British way, so CENTRE.
Okay.
And we're based in Bristol, and you can look at the stuff that we do, and then my research profile will come up there. Alternatively, you can get in touch with me directly through Twitter. So my handle is at Fabzucchi. So that's FABZUCCI. I'd be happy to kind of speak to people directly as well.
Perfect, and we'll link all of that as well as the articles that you've written up in the show notes of this episode. So.
Thank you, Rick. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
You too. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track in delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland